So I thought I would do another um, video on economics. Part of the motivation for this is to have better educational tools about what's happening in society. I'm hoping this will be a benefit for pretty much everyone, including homeschool, also people that are interested in self-education, self-improvement. And this is more thoughts on economics. Um, this video, before listening to this one, you should listen to my other economic videos first, because a lot of the things talked about in the other ones are kind of assumptions that factor into this video. So, before you can fix an economy, you have to figure out where the problems are and what actually needs to be fixed to make sense. If your car is broken, you figure out where the breakage is, and that's what you fix. You keep what's working. You don't throw away everything bad. You only get rid of what's harmful. So, in American society and in the American economy and in the North American economy, and this filters out into other economies, all of society doesn't benefit from the economy. Right now, it's very much like labor and capital are against each other. Capital wants to gain only the wealth, and they only want to have the money and the good things and the nice things, and they want the big houses and the mansions, but they don't want the poor and they don't want the middle class. They don't want there to be a middle class. They don't believe in a middle class. They believe that everyone is pretty much targets for them to suck money out of. Now, the labor class has no way. They don't have any voice. They're having their life being pushed. They're being pushed into the corner, basically, or backed into a corner, and that makes in living beings, when you back someone into a corner, it forces enmity and it can create war. Because when someone has its back against the wall and you're, antagonizing it, its natural behavior is for the animal or the organism, like, if it was some kind of wild animal, its natural inclination would be to defend itself. So you can't expect that those people won't want to defend themselves from being fleeced and robbed blind and from not being able to participate in society. I'm not arguing that either group has to win against the other. Okay, we're not trying to favor any particular group or person. What we want is for people from both sides of life to decide they want to work together more and cooperate more. Okay, society and civilization is based on the idea that people can cooperate and that they can find some common ground to be able to coexist and to even help each other to some extent. That's what you need. Now, in the previous videos, I had explained a lot of the concepts around the idea of a middle class, a poor class. There's several poor classes actually, and a rich elite class. I don't want people to think that is because I believe in social class. I'm actually against social class. Social class warfare is a thing, and it comes from the idea that too many people are obsessed with class warfare and social ranking. Social ranking itself creates warfare, a type of class warfare. But the reason we talk about things in terms of middle class, poor class, and elite class is the middle class represents the idea of families being able to participate in society, and that family is the basic unit of society. So the goal and direction of the videos is not class warfare and it's not class ranking. It's to look for the best representation of how families can live in society and how families can be a basic unit of society, and for families to have their best chance at being able to live. That's why we have to portray things in terms of, you know, a societal breakdown of what the demographics of society are. And we're also looking for ways of doing that that isn't that isn't doesn't do a racial, view of it. We're not looking for that. We're looking for the goal is how can you help families to live in society, and how can you provide a safe haven for families to live and work in a country. To do that, you have to have the economic policies favor families. Okay? Okay, that being said, when you hear economists talk about current and future economic policy, a lot of the time what you have to do is break down what they're saying into code, because they're speaking in code, and you have to understand what the codes mean. And they're doing this, uh, it's kind of cleverly disguising a lot of what they say when you actually realize what they're saying. And because when you translate the code, they're talking about leaving behind immense numbers of society to be allowed to allow most of the population to basically be destroyed, and that's okay. The direction of society they describe, the direction of society is that mega corporations and large corporations will be productive, and that they will be working, and that they are the next civilization. And they're talking about individual people or nothing. And this is why you will hear people talking about universal basic income and welfare more. And they're doing that because they know that big business is swallowing up all of society, and it is not allowing anything left for anyone else to be able to be surviving on. And that's why they're talking about universal basic income and other economic systems for poverty and other things, because they see that there's a disconnect where the elite class and big business, now that it has robots and machines and computers, it can now leave behind entirely the poor and middle classes. Now, some people are going to argue that they're not going to leave the middle class behind because that's who they sell to. But they're okay with, they are championing and engineering the idea that they will drain wealth from that middle class, and that they're not going to really give back to them. So that means that they are turning the middle class into other forms of a poor class. And this is why the middle class is being wiped out. Now, people are going to argue that it's not being wiped out, that you still have a middle class, but the fact is, people have to have 3 jobs or 2 jobs, and then have their spouse work if they've still got a spouse, and they have to have other family members helping them just to pay the mortgage and the house payment or their apartment payments. And their housing is getting smaller, and their hours are going up. That basically means they're not middle class anymore, or that they're being slowly over time pushed into the poor classes. Now, one of the concepts that I believe will help to explain this is in math. When you were learning about math in school, they had these symbols for greater than or less than in math. And this symbol kind of meant that you weren't right at the number. You could be below that number or close to it. And sometimes to think in terms of that or calculus limits, it means that you don't have to be right at that number, but you're close to or moving in that direction. And that's how this is working. It's easier if you don't think that this is exactly, right on the dot like that. It's easier to think that is the direction approaching and moving towards this? Yes. So not it's you might find you can still find some people in the middle class, but the middle class is mostly eaten and it is shrinking. So it's moving towards or less than or it's approaching this direction. There's no question about it. So when you define things, you know, that's how you can look at it. Because what'll happen is you'll find somebody who will decide they want to argue this one little point that you're at 99% instead of 100%. Therefore, it's a lie, and you have to watch out for that because people can be tricky and they don't know so you have to define your logic differently. Okay, but we're talking about economics. So these economists, they're talking about, openly the idea that, you know, it's in their videos on YouTube, many of them now, where they'll show and talk about, some guy, this man and woman are, on the street and they're sitting on the edge of the curb with their feet in the ditch and they've got nothing to do, no job, no food, no nothing. And all of society has left these people behind and it's only pursuing opportunity for big business, the corporation. Now, this is part of why in one of my previous videos I talked about the idea how during the shutdowns, roughly half of all of the small businesses in the country were eaten. They were eaten by bigger businesses, and that was allowed. Nobody stopped them. They should have. Okay, that the direction of society is moving against individuals being able to have a say and be free in society and be able to actually move and do and have the same privileges that big business has. When the Federal Reserve was created, around that time, we became the corporation of the United States instead of the United States. And over time, that view from that event, as well as from World War II and a few other events, the view of government and society over time changed to where businesses were what are protected and cared for, but not individual people. It didn't happen all at once. It's by degrees. By degrees, people are being seen as expendable, whereas robots and mega corporations are where things are moving towards. That doesn't work. Okay? For society to be able to be healthy, you need all of society to be able to participate and live and have its needs met. And this is why economic policy in the US needs to reflect that. Economic policy needs to move towards everybody being able to participate. And right now you have new versions of monopolies now. The new version of monopoly you can see is that people are second to corporations. Also, when corporations go international, It's a new form of monopoly because they're like countries unto themselves. So the economic policy also isn't addressing the idea that your needs cannot be taken care of only by wealth and money. See, this is part of the trap that all economists and economic policies fall into is they're trying to define society through only the flow of money. There's many errors and flaws in this because many of the things in the economy that provide quality and benefit and sustain life are not defined through money or through using monetary means, uh, specifically family needs. For example, mothers create quality of life. That is their role and their God given gift. They create love and life in a family, and they create several of the other tools and instruments through which the family can be sustained historically. They would make most of the clothes that the family wore. That is not the case now, but in order for women to see their role, their God given role, and how to achieve the most happiness, they need to look at how women protected families in the past. And anyway, this basically goes to the thought that not all of the quality and benefits of society can be measured by monetary means. See, we need to look at new ways of looking at things. And this is how we look at how we're going to fix the economy. So, as these economists and others, they're talking about how people will be homeless in big numbers, or very likely they'll be living in coffin houses, such as in Hong Kong. I've talked about that in some of my other videos. As they lose their voice and power, they won't be able to sustain themselves. And what's happening is, this is an interesting thought, that these economists and financial people and these bankers, they've already figured out what they want to do for big business. They already have a plan for the future of big business. But they're all kicking the can down the road for what's going to happen to individual families and individuals. See? If they were really going to at some point have a plan for those people, they would have done it in a similar time frame as their plans for big business and corporations. This means that they're not going to come up with a plan to include those people. They're just going to keep kicking the can down the road, and everyone is expecting that someone else is going to take care of that. And they're expecting that government will have to at some point do something. But that won't happen also because part of one of the issues is that um, national national sovereignty is being taken away from most of these countries. And if you look at what's going on, it's cleverly hidden that the new national sovereignty is hidden behind the scenes as being directed by these large companies that are trying to steer the ship of these governments. And that's what lobbyists do. Okay? For probably, I haven't measured this exactly, but it's probably between 40 and 50 years, or even since the close of World War II, there's always been an army of lobbyists in Washington, D.C., ever since the close of that war. And what lobbyists do, they get paid by big business and foreign powers and special interest groups or whoever has money, and they get paid to go to Washington, D.C. and try and campaign for the laws to be changed in the favor of whatever big business wants. And I haven't checked the numbers, but in previous administrations, the number of lobbyists in DC was in the tens of thousands. It was, I think it was close to 100,000 at some point. I haven't looked at it recently. I'm going to do another video on that because that's interesting too. But they're just basically running around trying to stack the cards against or for various groups. They think they're only trying to make sure that their business is taken care of. But in so doing, that means someone else has to lose. Someone else gets less pie when you take more. And that usually means individual people and families. This is kind of where that term comes from, the military industrial complex, because it ends up that only big business has a say, and they use the other tools of the government as their power to help them gain. And in the process, individual people are left behind. So this comes down to the idea that as these people just keep kicking the can down the road of what they're going to do for how they're going to include the rest of society, and they're not going to do it. Someone has to make changes, and changes have to be reflected in the economic policies and laws. And those laws and economic policies need to allow for all levels of society to function and participate. Now, I've looked at some videos that other people that are economists do, and you see some bizarre things where some of them are just talking smoke, and that they don't have a real foundation. And some of them will be at really good schools. Like there's an old video of some guy from Stanford, and he's talking about this idea that people could do away with income taxes and only do consumption taxes. But then later in the same video, he's talking about increasing value-added taxes. But see, so he's basically he's used code to talk himself in a circle, and it's not truthful because consumption taxes and value-added taxes are really the same thing. They're mostly the same thing. So with the first part of the video, he was talking about increasing consumption taxes. And the second part of the video, he was talking about getting rid of value-added taxes. Sorry, I might not have worded that very good, but he was talking about them as if consumption taxes and value-added taxes were not the same thing when they are. And in one part, he's talking about the tax going up and the same tax going down in the other part. See? So these people, sometimes they do stuff like wordsmithing. Wordsmithing is like people will want to sound and be clever, and they'll be talking in circles and just selling. It's just selling an idea, but not having any foundation. Okay? And a lot of the time, wordsmithing is about tricking people or making them buy something that they don't really want to do. See? And this is part of why in the previous videos I talked about how we're actually in a predatory economy. Okay? For an economy to work right, you need to get rid of the predators. You need to get rid of them. You also need to create functions that will prevent them from coming back in also. Now, I have an idea of something to explain to you. This will help to illustrate this principle. People have done videos of Yellowstone, and in these videos, okay, where they film the wildlife going through Yellowstone, There's one particular video of bison moving through the park in Yellowstone in winter, and everything is covered in snow. And the bison are being followed by the wolves. Okay, this is very interesting. So these wolves are trying to kind of look for the weak parts of the herd to pick them off and eat them. And in effect, the bison are being moved by the wolves. The wolves are, in a way, they're steering the herd. And this is very much how the predators in the economy are working right now. And what's happening with big business. Even though the wolves are very small compared to the bison, by using intimidation and control and fear and other means, they're moving this herd around. And that's predatory economy. We don't see where the bison would have ended up if the wolves weren't there. How would it be different? How would society be different? See? And this has to do also with the new forms of monopolies. So one of the things that's going to have to be done is there's going to have to be more education about like free trade zones, like um, cities and counties and states. They're going to have areas where people, poor and middle class people, can just go and have a space that is rent free, to have like flea markets where they can just barter and trade with each other. Places outside of the U.S. have this. Lots of places in Europe and Asia have these, where you go and people just, they can throw out a blanket and sell stuff on the blanket or whatever, or put up a card table, and there's no fees or legislation or people there, controlling who has access to it. By degrees, people, I've already talked about this before, but by degrees, people ruin farmers markets by putting in fees and their own rules to steer, trying to get rid of their rivals in these free markets. So you need to create more systems to embrace the ability of a poor class to lift itself out of poverty, and for people to see some business in society. There needs to be a function where you can do cashless business in society on a better level in these cottage industries and lower echelons of society. And that's a safety measure. You don't want everyone to do that, but you want a safety, it's like a safety brake there that can be used to help the poor lift themselves out of a death tailspin in the economy. See? And part of the failure of this is that the policies in the country have a tendency to want to push out the poor and lower middle class, and instead worship and emulate the rich. This is part of why our society is not going in a good direction. Society is trying to worship power and wealth instead of assign it to a specific function. That's pretty much all for now, but I hope you'll think about this and that people will look for ways they can fix societal problems.